Good morning and welcome to our Alaska Collaborative on Health and the Environment teleconference, Protecting Future Generations, the Need to Unravel Historical Intergenerational Trauma, with special guests Lisa Ellanna and Elder Kathy Sanchez. I'm Diana DeFazio and I'll be facilitating today's call. CHE-Alaska is a regional partnership group of the National Collaborative on Health and the Environment. CHE-Alaska aims to advance knowledge and effective action to address growing concerns about the links between human health and environmental factors. You can find more information at akaction.org and healthandenvironment.org. And as I mentioned before, we actually have two sets of presentation slides for today's call, so everyone will need to go to our homepage to download them at akaction.org. And these are PDF documents, so our speakers will say next slide to help you follow along, and you just click through your document. Keep in mind that there will be an opportunity for discussion during the last 10 minutes of the call today. Now it is my honor to welcome and introduce our guests. Lisa Ellanna is a Nupiaq from Nome, and Lisa is currently the director of the Kawerak Katirvik Cultural Center in Nome. Previously, she assisted in the administration of the Manilak Regional Wellness Program, and before working with Manilak, Lisa worked for Kawerak Wellness in the Bering Strait region. Lisa is the oldest of 11 children, the mother to 4 children, and grandmother to 2 boys. And she has a great interest in historic events that have affected Alaska Native people, and she feels strongly about understanding a historical context to current social circumstances for both individuals and communities. Lisa is a strong advocate for culturally relevant approaches and interventions in service, delivery, and health care of Alaska Native peoples. And Lisa will be presenting first, so you will want to have her presentation up in front of you. And I think I'm going to change things a little bit and go ahead and let Lisa give her presentation, and then I will introduce Elder Kathy Sanchez. So welcome, Lisa. You may go ahead and begin.
Good morning. Thank you, Diana. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Diana, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. Just keep that volume. Don't go any quieter.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the introduction. I'm not going to go back to that and waste any more time. If people are interested, please give me a call over at the Katirvik Cultural Center in Nome or email me. Diana has my email. She could distribute that to everybody. If you want more information, I would be very, very happy to have a conversation with you on the phone. Or if you're in Nome, come visit. I'm in Anchorage until Thursday as well, if there's anybody in Anchorage that would like to meet. You could just please feel welcome and don't hesitate to get a hold of me at any point. So this presentation is part of kind of a larger picture of what we do over at the Katirvik Cultural Center. We help to provide cultural orientation to new health care providers in our region, and any agency that wants to participate is welcome. We co-host almost every single publicly held event in the community. We're there as a cultural center, of course. We have a beautiful exhibit gallery. We have a beautiful classroom we call the Kugji. We work in partnership with the schools to do cultural education across the entire region. So this presentation I'm about to give is, I'm going to run through it pretty fast. It's just a tiny portion of what we do at Katirvik. This is not even part of our actual job description, but we do it anyway because it helps people understand each other. So I'll just go on to the first slide. I included this because there's some words in our vernacular daily lives, that we use a lot and we might take for granted and we might not really understand. So to heal, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, means to make whole. And that's a tall order when so many pieces of people's existence has been chipped away at. So you need to keep that in mind, to make whole. So I'm going to be talking about intergenerational trauma along with my elder, Kathy Sanchez, who I consider the absolute expert. And she's going to be, next slide, please. She's going to be talking after me, so I don't want to take up too much of her time. Next slide. We're on slide number 3. And this is just a general statement. You know, many Alaska Native American, Maori people, First Nations people, all over the world, indigenous people all over the world. We know that there's been several generations, and we are told stories, and we carry wounds inside of us that our great grandparents experienced at contact. You know, very, very different cultures, very, very different value systems, very, very different definitions of what knowledge is, what success is, what power is. So those differences, we carry those memories, we carry those experiences, we carry those stories, and Elder Kathy is going to do an exercise with us that's going to really illustrate that. So next slide, slide number 4. And I know that as an audience wanting to call into a teleconference about intergenerational trauma, you must have some idea about all this stuff already. Otherwise, you wouldn't be interested. So I'm going to breeze through these. Colonization, North America was discovered. And it wasn't just North America. I shouldn't have put that on there. Every indigenous place that was colonized went through these things. Diseases, alcohol, enslavement, land theft, religious indoctrination. Children were taken. Different economic systems, different value systems, different family makeup. Next slide, number 5. So the nature of indigenous societies is very communal, right? So we share, we take care of each other, we make sure people are taken care of. So the communal nature of our societies as indigenous people kind of amplifies any injury because everybody feels it, everybody's affected, everybody's close, everybody's extended family, and we all feel that, that trauma together. So many academics kind of that are involved in the transcultural psychology world in indigenous countries, they're starting to talk about how, because indigenous people are such communal societies, that we need to identify entire communities as locations of injury. Next slide, please. Here's a neat quote by Dr. Lawrence Kermayer from McGill University, and he's pretty respected in the world of trying to understand historical trauma, and he's taken a couple of turns recently in some of his work that really concerned me. I'm going to give him a phone call. But here's his quote here. There are high rates of social problems, demoralization, depression, substance abuse, suicide, and other mental health problems in many, though not all, Aboriginal communities. The long history of cultural oppression and marginalization has contributed to the high levels of mental health problems found in many communities. That's something that our healthcare system needs to understand, and our legal system and our education system, all these systems we work in. So next slide, number 7. Here's a kind of a little timeline according to my understanding. I didn't, pull this out of anywhere, but after, the past 10 years of talking about this issue, intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, we can, we read so many books and so many papers. We can lay out the timeline of contact. I think it's really important here to say that after the Russian government or the Russian ownership, I guess, of Alaska kind of ceased, and then Alaska was owned by the United States, the federal government took over the fur seal trade and continued enslavement of Unangan people until 1966. 1966. I think that's important for people to know. So there's a lot of fresh wounds. People say the word historical or intergenerational, thinking that it might be from generations ago, but actually it's right now. So the next slide, number 8, Turtle Island eras. These are extremely general, and I mean absolutely no disrespect to any of my Alaskan fellow Indigenous people or my Native American fellow Indigenous people. This is just a very general kind of understanding of federal policy and how it's kind of really directly, very directly impacted Native American people. So the next slide, number 9. And I want to just, take the boarding school era as an example and really take a look at it as one example of intergenerational trauma. My dad, I didn't know, he passed away when I was 5 years old or so, but I didn't know that he went to Wrangell Institute. He was taken away and went to Wrangell Institute. So I guess he was the child of an illegitimate relationship, and I don't know the dynamics, but I just found this out in 2013 that he went to Wrangell Institute from age 8, and I found that out from Jim LaBelle, who's married to Susan, of course, and Susan was my dad's best friend, and I didn't realize that, or a good friend, I guess. They said they knew each other very well, so I didn't know that, and everything made sense after that. The mistreatment, the abuse that I remember, I couldn't figure out how somebody could be that cruel until I heard from Jim's mouth himself, straight from Jim, that they went to Wrangell together, and then it all made sense. So he lost his identity, he lost his language, he lost traditional knowledge, he lost traditional ecological knowledge, he lost that relationship with his land, he lost his ability to parent because he wasn't home to learn how to be a parent. He felt a loss of sense of belonging when he went home. He internalized that oppression because what came out of his mouth when he was drinking was very, very clear that he had internalized that oppression. And he perpetuated that against other family members. So that's one example. So the way he was treated as a child continued into his adulthood. That's how he thought it was normal to treat people. So that's how he treated my mother and me and my sister. And it affected, my father passed away when I was almost 5 years old. And even though he's not with us physically, he still has affected the way my mother has made decisions in her life, the way she has reared us, and the way that I raise my children and my grandchildren. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations right there affected by him going to boarding school. That's just one example. You can see how it illustrates, that example might illustrate how just a boarding school experience alone could affect an entire, 5, 6, 7 generations. I don't know how long it's going to take for us to wash that out. But that's one example. The next slide, number 10. So the incidence of these types of child abuse in boarding schools was really, really high. I remember Jim LaBelle, if anybody's heard him speak before, talk about the gauntlet, talk about the strap line, talk about the broken bones, talk about the sexual abuse, talk about, all these horrific experiences that our sweet babies went through. So once I heard from Jim that my father went to Wrangell, it all made so much sense. I didn't know before that. I had not a hatred, but indifference almost when it came to my father. I couldn't care for him because how can somebody be that way? But until, and that's how I felt until Jim told me that they went to Wrangell together, and then it made sense. And then I wasn't able to say, that didn't make it okay, of course. His behavior was not okay, but it gave me understanding and compassion for his child self. Gave me understanding. I knew why. That was important. There's always reasons why, right? Reasons why for every single behavior. Next slide, number 11.
Lisa, this is Diana. I'm sorry to interject. Just several people joined the call late, and I'm getting some questions about where the presentation is. So I'm really sorry to do this, but I just want to let everyone know, akaction.org to download the slides that Lisa Ellanna is currently presenting. And I believe, are you on number 11?
Yeah, and I didn't number them, so we're talking about boarding school experience right now.
Yeah, it'll be like page 11 for people on with the PDF. So thank you, and I'm sorry for that interruption.
Yeah, that's okay. That's fine. Thank you, Diana. I'm glad more people are joining. So, we're talking about some really difficult things, and I just want to make sure that people know that this is not to blame people. This is not to point fingers at anybody and say, this person did wrong and that person did wrong. And that's not the reason why we talk about these things. The reason why you talk about hurt is to find some kind of reconciliation, even if it's just within yourself. And also for service delivery providers, if you have understanding of history, you're able to have compassion, you're able to have context, right? Context to have compassion is so very, very important. So I just wanted to say that, even though we were talking about some difficult facts, FACTS, facts of history, it's important to do that, to recognize and speak about the truth. It's also important to realize that everybody's experience of this history is different, and everybody's cultural context and the narrative of that story and that history within families can be even more traumatizing than the events themselves. I think we need to keep that in mind. The story, the history, the understanding has become part of culture. How we understand ourselves to be culturally. That's part of our narrative, the discourse, our experience. And that's just as important as the actual factual events that have happened in the past. And, people take things differently, so we have to keep that in mind. And if you feel distressed during this, if I trigger anything, I'm very, very sorry. Please, take inventory of people in your life that you're able to speak to, and I hope you have support systems available. I'm going to move on to slide number 12. So what are the symptoms of historical trauma and grief in our communities? And I put in here Native communities, but if you look at every single Indigenous community or every single community that has experienced mass trauma, genocide, ethnic cleansing, you're going to see these things. We know about the Armenians. We know about things in Asia that have gone on. We know about, genocide has happened all over the place. Here's some symptoms that we find in common with all these events, these mass events: suicide, drug and alcohol abuse or self-medication, child abuse, lateral violence in the form of domestic violence, sexual violence, and gossip, and holding each other down, loss of parenting skills, loss of sense of community, internalizing that oppression, multi-generational discrimination, disliking yourself because of your race, being told you're no good long enough, through a couple generations. It sure gets into your head. General decrease in health and well-being, So those are some of the symptoms that we see. Sound familiar to Alaska situation? So next slide is number 13. Here's a really neat quote from Linda Smith, Linda Tuhiwai Smith. She's Maori, and she's a very respected scholar, historian, advocate. So we have to acknowledge that our situation as colonized communities is very tied to history, right? Everybody's life is tied to their history. But she brings up a good point here, that lack of collective self-determination. I think communities need to think about that, So the next slide, number 14, local control and self-determination are important factors that contribute to individual native wellness. In Canadian wellness studies conducted by Chandler and Lalonde, many of you might be familiar with the study. They took a look at 189 communities, I believe, across Canada, and they found that there were certain protective factors and cultural continuity factors that were really tied to their suicide rates. And they saw that the communities that had the most leadership positions held by Indigenous people, if the majority of their population was Indigenous, they had the least amount of suicide. Next slide. And you can see that in this graph here, those protective factors. They're police officers being Native. Many adults talk and teach, and scold children and teenagers. Number 3, schools and teachers and principals respect local culture and work with the community to integrate that culture into the school system. Number 4, cultural activities and community events happen regularly. Number 5, self-determination. Village leaders have authority and work to improve their village. Number 6, health and social service are easy to get and are helpful to those who receive them. So those factors, you could see there in blue there, the more of those factors present in the community, that red line there indicates suicide rates. So the blue lines are self-determination and local control, and the red line is suicide. You could see how it goes down as the self-control, community control goes up. That's important to know. Next slide, please. So again, Western research is confirming what we know, that restoration of Indigenous self-determination and realignment with Indigenous definitions of wellness and success and power and knowledge for the individual, the family, and community is the solution. So next slide, please, number 17. I'm going to talk now a little bit about ACEs. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is probably something you're very familiar with, having called into this teleconference here. Here are those 10 factors, and I'm not going to read them out loud. But the thing I wanted to illustrate here is that ACEs is a very, very important tool for us in Western science and academia to confirm that if you treat somebody badly as a child, it's going to affect them for the rest of their life. And here are those 10 things that they were taking a look at in those 17,000 medical records when they did the study. Alaska Native people, for the most part, everybody I know has all 10 of those. My peer group, in my age group, we have all 10 of these having happened in our families, the people I know. So the more adverse childhood experiences you have in your life, the more prone you are, the more at risk you are to health effects, diabetes, COPD, depression, suicidal ideation, those kinds of things, mental health issues, physical health issues. But this also illustrates, and I'm going to use that buzzword, I'll talk about this buzzword a little later, but resilience. That word scares me quite a bit. but you can tell that people are strong, having gone through these things and still making it through. So the next slide, I just wanted to say really quickly about ACEs that ACEs takes into account an individual, a snapshot of an individual's life, but it doesn't take into account entire communities experiencing the same thing, mass trauma. How does that translate? We have to think about that. Next slide. So here's some definitions for you to reference, and I'm not going to read them, but they are very, very important to understand as you kind of think about and contextualize this discussion that we're having. Next slide, please. So here's some really important questions that Bentham Ohia from New Zealand posed to us at a recent meeting, 2014. I'm old if I call that recent, I guess. But what counts as knowledge and what knowledge counts? And then, he didn't write these down. We were having a discussion. He was presenting. And then he paused for a while, and then he said, who gets to decide that? That's a very, very important question. I think we need to keep that in mind as we provide services to our communities. Next slide, please. Here's that discussion I wanted to share with people about the word resilience. And I didn't take this from anywhere. This is kind of my own gut feeling about this buzzword right now. And resilience is used in many different contexts, but in the context that I'm using it here in this presentation is in mental health. It's very important to say that. We could be resilient physically. We could heal easily physically, but in a mental health sense, that's how I mean it. So we encourage people, to be resilient in the face of multi-generational trauma. As Alaska Native people and as Indigenous people, there's a lot of mental health initiatives out there that say pushing resilience. But when you take a look at a family that's going through abuse, if there's a spouse that's beating another spouse, do we just encourage that beaten spouse to keep being resilient? Is that the only thing that we're going to do? Or do we encourage the perpetrator to stop? Do we hold that perpetrator accountable, right? Think about that. So when you're hurting somebody and you're telling them that they're going to be okay because they're resilient, that doesn't do anything to stop or to acknowledge that a wrong is being committed. It doesn't. It doesn't provide for any accountability. Telling someone they're resilient doesn't translate into stopping any abuse whatsoever. Telling someone they're resilient doesn't encourage policy improvements. It doesn't encourage justice. So the approach in mental health, talking about resilience, I see it as another pull yourself up by your bootstraps approach by the current power dynamic. I think that's something we need to think about because it does nothing to force the systems that are perpetuating injustice to change. It does not require the systems to operate in an ethical way at all. We're just telling people, just keep being resilient. Just keep being resilient. You can get through this. But in the meantime, we're not doing anything to change the system. That's not fair, and that's not good. We have to think about that. So the last slide here, I just want people to know, go ahead and go to the next slide, that there are ways that we can, as communities, we all have culture. Everybody has culture. For Alaska Native communities, some of the most helpful and healing things that we do are coming together in potlatch, drumming, singing, language restoration programs. Even just to hear your Indigenous language being spoken provides strength. Community gatherings of all kinds, talking circles, tribal doctors. So if you're a service provider and you incorporate these, you're serving the Indigenous population of your area, if you incorporate local ceremony and local ways of healing, you're going to be way more effective. So I hope that was all I had. I know I took up too much time. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay, Lisa. Thank you so much. And I imagine that what you've shared with all of us has planted some good seeds for discussion. So I do want to remind everyone that there will be an opportunity at the end of the call to ask questions or make comments. And now I would like to, it's my honor to welcome Elder Kathy Sanchez. She is a Tewa elder from San Ildefonso Pueblo. She's a fierce activist and organizer who believes in protecting our most vulnerable, our pregnant women, children, and elders. And she's the co-founder of Tewa Women United, a group that raises awareness about environmental issues, domestic violence prevention, and drug and alcohol abuse. Elder Kathy currently serves as the organization's Environmental Health and Justice Program Manager. And she's organized women's voices in her community to be instruments of political, social, and economic change for gender equity and equality, both in Indian country and internationally. Tewa Women United is a collective intertribal women's voice in the homelands of northern New Mexico. And she and the other women in founding Tewa Women United have put spiritual values into action for community healing, ending the culture of violence, and especially environmental violence, and bringing in holistic well-being for all and Mother Earth. And Elder Kathy, it's an honor to welcome you, and I'm sure that my introduction did not truly do you justice. There's much more that I could have included, but I want to make sure that you have time to share with us your presentation. And for all of our listeners, this is Elder Kathy Sanchez's presentation is online at akaction.org, so please be sure to download those slides so you can follow along with her. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. It's an honor to be among such knowledgeable people that are listening as well, and to hear Lisa lay out the foundation for me is very, very powerful and helpful, so thank you. So you're on slide 1 that says it's a Native worldview, so welcome. And then with that slide, I like to do an opening with grounding and a centering for us, and so I'll do a little prayer. So, dear Creator, you are known by many names. We honor all and welcome all ancestors of all peoples to witness and to guide us for our actions and discussions. We welcome in good faith to speak loudly, to reclaim loving, caring, beloved communities where men and women seek guidance and support from many, many multiple levels of relations, connections to be one in mind, heart, and spirit. So be with us now, guide us, bless us, we sisters and brothers, in sisterhood and in brotherhood, with heart to heart, hearts beating, turning to loudly, clear, rhythmic sounds of flowing goodness. We will succeed. We will change the course of dark thoughts to loving light, illuminate our minds. Safe spaces now have been opened. With blessings, we will continue. Good luck. So, next slide. Bipolave means welcome. Come into our attempt as a Native organization to see things from a Native perspective. Next slide. Of knowingness, knowing who we are, and having that experience of it, and having the knowledge base, the knowledge of the Euro-American system, and how one worldview system and the predominant worldview systems that are there have to work together to help grow our soul. Our souls were wounded when all this discovery, when all this colonization happened, and then, as Lisa said, it stays in us. So our attempt to help heal and understand the soul wounding is to really have a physiological and psychological grounding in knowing that our cellular memories are still carrying those soul woundings, and they weren't spoken about. So I think the term resilience to me sounds like re-silencing, just silently carrying it and knowing that you're getting strong on the outside, but the inside still carries all that wound that's heavy. So in my presentation, I just want to go through it quickly to illustrate visually what happens. Next slide. So why are we here today? We are here for our women, our children, our futures. And so in being adults now, in being responsible, in caring about what's happening, we also have to take care of ourselves. Both the people that are on the colonizer side, they were also groomed in order to oppress, and they were told things as well. So there's a lot of soul wounding there too, of guilt, anger, and shame of not knowing. And so on the other side too, we have to heal ourselves as adults, reach back into our childhood to understand that our child minds were saving and knowing information from a child's point of view. And as adults, we're trying to understand it, and it's not going to be quite the same because now we as adults just need to go back and say, it's okay, it's all right, I'm here for you, let's go forward together. Let's stay with each other and help each other. So that's you reaching into yourself to have those discussions as well. And there's no guilt, there's no anger, and there's no shame in what we have experienced, but we need to let it out. Next slide. So trauma rocks ending silent, harmful passage of not knowing. That's what, to me, asking the spiritual guidance in my prayers, in my dream, was how do I show what is happening to us in this experiencing of what they're terming generational trauma, of passage from one generation to the next. And as Lisa said, we now are living with 5, 6 generations that are side by side. I knew my great-grandmother, and her knowledge goes back 5 generations, and I am now a great-grandmother, so there's generations in front of me. So all this is still very present, and we have to do the healing now. Oops. Sorry. I hit the wrong button on my end. Let me see. So the next slide, visual aid to understanding soul wounding. So soul wounding, I use rocks because rocks have density, they have mass, they have hardness. Just like our bodies on the inside, if we're carrying these pains, they turn to ulcer, they turn to cancer, they turn to all kinds of illnesses because the physiological and the psychological are combined in there and not being understood. But when one cell is harmed, these cells all around there become cancerous. And it's very, very, not just accumulative, but it's exponential harm. And I wanted to have that emphasized. So I think we're on slide, the first and second generations. Is everybody on there with the bags? So in the dream space, what came was Ziploc bags, rocks, and growing in size and sealing the Ziploc bags to keep in the silencing of what's happening. And so first generation, and 3 is a number that is manageable in multiplicity and growing. And so 3 is what I chose of the first generation. If they are holding these wounds of the colonizers coming in, of throwing them into boarding schools, of having to be raped when they're bringing in the railroad lines, and now the oil and gas and stuff, but they're hidden inside, and the women, and this is from the linear women's point of view, that if you're silent, then you're thinking, oh, if they don't know about it, then it won't hurt them. And so this silence of keeping it in, thinking you're doing something good, grows inside. Next slide. So the third and the fourth generation, you'll see how it's, if there's three that are hurting inside of you, the cells, they multiply, and now it's 3 times 3 times 3, so it's 9. And then the 9 grows to the fourth generation of 81. And so that weight is getting heavy inside. And when it's heavy inside, you want to medicate. You want to take care of it yourself. And you're ashamed of it. That's that guilt, anger, shame. You don't want to tell somebody. Or you go, as a child, I told them it was hurting because I was always sent away, and I didn't know why I was being sent away. But my mom was hurting. But that silencing, that thinking it was my fault, thinking well, what's wrong? We can't even know about it. So that bag and hurt is growing inside. And children aren't being told, thinking that, again, but they're sitting there watching. We're observing. Next slide. The third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh generations, they're sitting in a line because it's linear passing and not speaking, so their backs are to each other. When the lady in the third generation gives the bag to the fourth, they're not speaking, but they pass that bag of their multiples, and it's inserted in the next bag, sealed, and then the other lady is tapped. The other person is tapped. Sixth generation, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that bag gets puffy and heavy. And that puffiness, again, is that gas. G for guilt, A for the anger, and the S for the shame. And all that is not being let out. And that's that hurting. That's that soul wounding. That's that generational trauma that is not of the people's doing, but of the culture of violence that is perpetrating the continuity of dominance. And how do we, in both systems, we're in our native way of knowing and in our Euro-American way of knowing, we are in a culture of violence. We have to understand how the values and beliefs of that culture of violence is different, but it's harmful, and it's about killing. It's about death and destruction, to have power over beings, power over Mother Earth, power over us, power over just so they can have that power. Power is our energy of love. So I think the transformation, next slide. So the transformation is now to open those bags, and all the hurts that have been stuffed in needs to be let go. We need to let go. And we have some core values that I'll go over later, but let's see, it'll be the 6th, 7th generation now. They have said what core value we need in our community is letting go. And so they've added that one for us that have been working in this area. So on your slides, I lost track, but it's the 7th generation, where all that 3 times 3 times 3, and we started from just 3 wounds. Now it's 2,187. That's a massive accumulation of internal soul wounding that our generations that are further ahead of us have. And we wonder why, just in school, when somebody calls them, oh, you down Indian, they really get brutal, they get aggressive, they get angry. And we wonder why, I just said that. It was just a name. But they don't understand that wholeness of the wound needs to have that healing. And that healing is reclaiming our love of Mother Earth, our love for ourselves. And it's hard. When I was in a real domestic situation, I couldn't even say, in asking for help, I couldn't even say, I deserve healing. I deserve to be loved. I could only say no one deserves to be hurt. So there are steps before the actual circle of support starts, because we're in a linear mindset. We've learned the tools and techniques of the culture of violence in order to maintain our physical sense of place, of being a mother. I had to become that same equal to know when the next step of violence is coming, and then I felt good about being able to recognize, or not recognize, but match that power of violence with my power of violence. And I thought that was great. But those were oppressive tools and being back into that culture of violence that we need to unlearn. We need to let go. We need to not be that which in our gut is telling us is not a way to be a loving, caring person. And so thoughts are very powerful. What thoughts we give to children, to ourselves. And I'm not going to read this, but you have it. And so the thought exists already in light. So the prayer was to illuminate our mind, get those dark centers out of there, because the darkness, the dark thoughts, the evilness of a culture of violence stays there, hiding if we don't light those spots and give that breath to love and to rejuvenate our beingness. Next slide. So the culture of peace. And so culture of peace, which we aren't taught in schools, we aren't taught in a society that is governed by violence, is the culture of peace connects our thoughts. If we ask in prayers, we're redefining and reaffirming in loving light who we want to be, who we want to really be for our children, be for our relations, be for all over the Mother Earth. So now these rocks have a different look. Our perception has changed. They're still rocks, but they're loving rocks. They're rocks that give us our bedding in our rivers. They're rocks that are many shapes, many colors. They have many fine attributes, and they're us, but they have to be thought of in a different perception. So all our presence on this earth is our perception and how we have our point of views and how we have our native way of thinking and having relations, and in the Euro-American way of understanding what it takes to be whole in a context of where we find ourselves to be. And so the next slide, the butterfly model of transformative energy. We're in a transformative way to be present on this earth, and this is defined through a native person's perspective. And you can read the slide. I know I'm running out of time, so I just want to go through some of the highlight points. And so love is what I'm getting at, intentional energy of thought, our purposefulness. All our thoughts turn to breath, turns to the mist, turns to water. Thoughtfulness is goodness. And being in
the host has joined the conference.
Okay, so true will harmony starts from within. I'll get back to that point. It's always taking care of ourselves from within, healing our soul wounding. And you'll see on your slide some of our core values in our native way and how we incorporate those into living the truth from the heart in our practicing of our values in our work. And you can do that within any program that you're working in or that you do. And so our mission is to provide safe, courageous spaces. And you'll see our mission statement there. And so the butterfly model that you're seeing throughout the slides is giving love and thankfulness. We have our mind, our heart, and our spirit interwoven in order to give us that guidance by asking. We need to be asking. We've been shamed out of asking, and we need to do that of our ancestors. And when we heal ourselves, we heal our ancestors. So from sky energy, it's a very multi-level of existence of energy, and we don't want the culture of violence to be using the energy of love in a negative way by taking it apart and exploding it, and that's the nuclear energy, the radioactivity of unstable energy that was us, and we need to reclaim it. So I'll stop right there, and I think the slides are self-explanatory as you go through them, how the two sides need to work together, and how we need to ask the questions of ourselves. And I'm way ahead, and we can just thumb through to the three core P's of culture, in understanding that it's on both sides. It's not just one dominant over the other. And the last, inclusiveness slide, I think you'll get the idea from just reading through the slides, and then now we're back to full circle. So I'll stop right here, and thank you. And now the circles can happen.
My name is Dr. Stephanie Mines. I'm calling you from Oregon, outside of Portland in the Oxbow region. And I wanted to tell you about a conference that I'm convening in 2019 called Climate Change and Consciousness, Our Legacy for the Earth. It's www.ccc19.org. And I wanted to encourage you to consider participating.
The host has
conference
joined the conference.
With your message of how we can create this circle of love and bring together indigenous people with the culture of peace. I just returned from Aotearoa and was at Parihaka, which is the marae of the Taranaki iwi, where the first nonviolent, passive resistant movement to colonization occurred long before Gandhi in the 1860s, when colonization was occurring in Aotearoa, and two Maori leaders, Tohu and Tuiti, promoted passive nonviolent response, and there was incredible loss. But Parihaka, the site of this nonviolent resistance, became a sanctuary, and I am working right now to bring the grandson of Tuiti, that Maori leader, to this conference, Climate Change and Consciousness, and I would love to have your voice there as well. I'm finding great beauty in this presentation.
Thank you. Anyone else with questions?
I'm actually, this is Diana. I am back on the call and able to facilitate. I do apologize for that. So again, a reminder for this really important part of our call is when we all have a chance to discuss what's come up for us when we hear a presentation. So you can press 4* to unmute your line, and then when you're done, if you could please press 4* again to reduce the background noise.
And this is Dr. Mines again, calling you from Oregon. And I did have a question as well as sharing about climate change and consciousness. And my question has to do with what happens when within this culture of violence, within an individual family, I'm speaking of my own family here, that one of the younger generations perpetuates that culture of violence within themselves through alcoholism. And me as the mother and the grandmother of that person has to face their alcoholism in terms of wanting to be a force for change for the grandchildren, but being beset, being oppressed by the violence of my own daughter. How would you recommend, Dr. Sanchez, how would you recommend a culture of peace response to that situation?
I think there's many, they're called holistic healing approaches throughout the service providers, and I think the resources that are probably listed on the Alaskan site where our videos are, or where the conference happened. There's what I did with my grandchildren was to just have them with me when we do our gathering for Mother Earth. We pray with water, to water, speak with the water inside of us to the water that's outside of us. We plant. We have our healing foods oasis where they work. It's not by talk or probably the individual counseling is not working, but the approach of a holistic supported community where we're actually doing the healing in connectivity back to being grounded to Mother Earth. So with water, with fire, with creating, with speaking, with asking, with having all the different avenues of inputs and outputs of our brain. We have to rewire, we have to relearn, we have to unlearn. And it takes time, and it's just amazing how sometimes, and it is sad that some of our children really get to the end where they're consumed in their whole body with the alcohol, but once they get to see that Grim Reaper, and sometimes they cross over to the other side, they see that it's not time, that they need to do their amending their ways, and they come back with a whole different connective ways of spiritual living. And so it's that spirit rootedness that we want to get back to, because we're spirit people, we're energy people from inside out, using our body to communicate how to be present with each other in all the relations. So everything has the energy for life. We don't want to be of that destructive nature, and we don't want to feed into it. And so if you're transforming, you're looking from the future back to see what you want in your beloved communities, and not let the blockages try to stop you and work on those blockages. You're working from the goodness back to putting them in place so they'll be visible.
What a beautiful
Thank you.
answer. Thank you so much. I'm still having trouble. I've got Dr. Sanchez's PDF beautifully. I see that. But I'm having trouble getting the other resources on the website. I don't see the actual link to get those resources. So if you can just repeat.
Are you speaking? Are you speaking of the videos and the things that were posted for the Children's Environmental Health Summit that was being referenced?
Yes.
Okay. So on the homepage, other people might have this question, so if you don't mind, I'll respond to it now. This is Diana. On the homepage of our website, there is a link to that conference that took place all before last, and there are videos and all sorts of resources there.
Okay, so
and I'll be sure to send a follow-up email to everyone who signed up for today's call that will include a recording of this call. So if you missed part of the beginning, if you didn't have the presentation in front of you for Lisa Ellanna, you will have an opportunity to view that again, or if you want to hear Elder Kathy's again, you'll be able to do that, and I'll also include these other links that are being mentioned.
Perfect. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome. I would like to give an opportunity for a few more people to ask a question or make a comment. Again, 4-star will unmute your line so you can participate.
Hey, this is Misty Nicolai in Fairbanks, Alaska. And I just kind of wanted to add a little bit to what was just said. I was raised in like a very extreme version of violent culture. I'm Dene. I'm from Alaska, and even as a child, I realized this, even though the adults around me didn't guide or teach me that that was violence and unnatural. I knew that it was, and so throughout my life, I tried to live a better way, a healthier way, even in the environment I was raised in. But one thing is that even though I tried really hard, when I became a parent and I was pushed to a certain point by my children's behavior, when I got to a certain point, I would react in extreme anger, and I wouldn't be able to stop myself. I would be yelling, and I would stop and then look back, and I would realize that it was extremely violent. I'd be very ashamed, but I couldn't stop myself. Later I found out, there was a whole connection to, the trauma, but also to depression. And part of that was my physical self, my spiritual self, my mental self, and my emotional self were just really worn away. So when we look at people who suffer with alcoholism, I just want to really remind us to be aware that alcoholism is not the problem, that they're just trying to soothe whatever the real problem is. And so it'd be best to continue to show them as much love as we can and their good times, because what they're really trying to cover up is a lot of hurt. I guess that's it. It was just my comment.
Thank you. Does anyone want to respond?
Yeah, this is Lisa. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Is this Lisa Ellanna speaking?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Speak up just a little bit.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to thank the last guest for speaking up about how she, what her life were. I just want to say thank you for sharing that. It takes a lot of strength to share your humanity and your story. That's why and praise you for that, and thank you by sharing your from the safety of where you are now in your life, and with understanding, you help other people to heal. So thank you. I also wanted to say thank you very much for talking about how alcoholism is a form of self-medication and a symptom of a problem. I just wanted to say thank you for reiterating that point. We do a lot of misunderstanding who are not from our community, who don't know, even within our own community, who don't know our history, who don't have a context for understanding what they're seeing, and they don't understand. So they make judgments. I mean, we all do as human beings when we see something for the first time, and we don't know the full story. Of course, we make judgments, and we're subject to assumptions and stereotypes and all that because we're human beings. But thank you for saying that in this space, reiterating how self-medication is a symptom of a larger, deeper problem or pain. So, and I just want to make sure that, you, if you could get a hold of us, get a hold of me via email. I'd love to stay in touch and continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. And we are out of time pretty much, but I did want to invite you, Elder Kathy. Would you like to say anything else before we close out the call? And also, Lisa, if you have any other final remarks you'd like to make.
I'd just like to say thank you for all being on the call and for sharing. And if there's anything that was touched, I apologize, but it is a healing process, and we need to touch the pain in order to heal the pain. And it's like hearing a shattering, and it opens, but now we have to have another shattering to open our hearts to heal. And so the healing is a very instrumental part of our lived lives, our life narratives that we're sharing. So thank you, and I can be reached also for any other further discussions or questions with the last slide that I had. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Lisa, did you want to say anything else or
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you, Diana. Thank you so much for participating and bring to Elder Kathy presentation. It was very, very powerful, and continue to Kathy in any way to continue to learn from her. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone who called in today. I will be sending a follow-up email with a link to the recording and any additional resources that I can share to help the discussion continue. Again, you're welcome to contact the Alaska Community Action on Toxics office with any questions or comments, and the phone number is 907-222-7714. You can also email me at diana@akaction.org. And thanks again to everyone for your time and for sharing. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.